Priya, there don't seem to be huge numbers.
Yeah.
So we're going to have less people today, or people just having...
No, sir. I think they'll join in another 5 minutes. I'll start now, sir. Kapil has lost his internet, it seems. So I'm just trying to share the PPT as well. So
okay,
I'll just do it in a minute.
that's fine. The PPT comes on.
Yeah. Okay. Has it come, sir? Is it seen?
Yeah, it's
okay.
on.
Yeah. Then So good evening, everyone, and warm welcome to those who have joined us for the first time in this How to Be Investment Ready series, and welcome back to those who have been part of our earlier sessions in the series. The How to Be Investment Ready series is a 6-session series presented by TiE Chennai and Kiritsu Forum. And we started this series in the first week of August this month. And our first session was on Are You Startup Ready, which covered the Seed Stars 18-point investment readiness checklist. And we had our second session on various stages of funding and the investor expectations. Our third and the previous session was on part one of fundraising, which covered the value proposition and business model to business plan. Today we are in our fourth session, that is the part two of the fundraising, which is going to be on the pitching and the presentation aspects. And the speaker for the How to Be Investment Ready series is Mr. Subramaniam Iyer, and he's also called as Subra. Subra is a forensic accountant, independent director, angel investor, strategy consultant, focusing on business models, and an expert witness with over 30 years of experience in Asia and Australia, and transactions experience in Asia, the US, and the Europe. Subra is co-president of Kiritsu Forum, Singapore, as well as Chennai. And Kiritsu Forum is the largest angel network in the world with 53 chapters and over 3,000 accredited investors. In the entrepreneur space, over the last decade, Subra has played a missionary role in guiding and assisting CEOs of small companies in South India and Southeast Asia to critical growth stages. In India and more broadly Asia, through his other ventures, Subra worked on understanding and addressing the severe shortage of resources in the small business sectors, from financial capital to experience capital, relationship capital, and infrastructure. Subra was a partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, Singapore. In over 21 years with PwC, Subra has been an auditor and tax due diligence in the past 21 years with PwC. He has led over 100 engagements of various sizes, including many that were cross-border for US and European multinational cooperation and private equity firms. Subra is qualified with bachelor's in accountancy honors from the National University of Singapore, and thereafter with the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Australia, which is now known as Chartered Accountants Australia and New Zealand. He has also completed the general management program at Harvard Business School in fall of 2007 and is also an alumnus of that school. On behalf of TiE Chennai and the participants here, sir, I would like to welcome you and invite you to take over the session. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Priya. Good evening to everyone. As Priya said, this is the fourth of 6 sessions. And I will get straight into it because today's session is probably on the heavier side, and it links quite a bit to an earlier session, and it will also link to one of the future sessions, which is on valuation, which is the 6th session. So with that, Priya, the next slide, please. Okay, this just summarizes what Priya went through. So these are the 6 sessions. We are in session number 4, which is fundraising 2, and I will talk mostly about planning and executing the fundraise. And there are aspects here that is a flow on from the stages of funding, and there is also a flow on into things like valuations and transaction documents. The next slide, please, Jay. Okay, so this is what I plan to cover today: who to pitch to, and you'll have to think a little bit about session 2, where I touched on who to pitch to and what would be the investment expectations of each of those group. I'll try not to repeat those because, for those who attended every session, that could become a little bit boring, but I will briefly touch on aspects just to bring the thing together. I'll talk about what is a teaser or an executive summary. I'll talk a little bit about NDAs, which stands for non-disclosure agreements. I'll talk a little bit about what's an information memorandum. Sometimes it's prepared, sometimes it's not. All right, but you should know what it is, because information that goes into the information memorandum is a little bit of the same as to what goes into a pitch deck, right? Except that they're presented differently. And then we'll talk a little bit about, how to practice the importance of feedback and how to improve your pitch. So with that, next slide, Priya. Okay, right. So the first question that you would need to deal with is, who do you pitch to, right? And we talked quite a bit about this in session 2, right? As to what stage you are. Are you ready, for example, to pitch to an angel or an angel group? If you are very early in the piece, the only people who would trust you and give you money is friends and family. Now, the pitch at that level can be extremely informal, and and therefore easy to do, right? So a lot of what I'd be touching on is more for the third and fourth categories. How do you pitch to angels and angel groups, and also how do you pitch to venture capital, right? Because these groups tend to behave kind of similar. I just fit in a category in between, pitching to accelerators and incubators. So whether it's the incubators from the universities, the IIT Madras has several incubators. You have the rural incubator, you have the biotech incubator or the healthcare incubator. There are a lot of incubators or accelerators outside as well. And they may be focused on specific areas. There are also accelerators internationally. Some of the companies we have invested in have pitched to accelerators overseas. And the good thing about pitching to accelerators is that, they give you exposure that you otherwise will not get, right? You get the benefit of institutions. I mean, and there are large companies that also run such accelerator programs. For example, one of the property groups in Brigade runs an accelerator program in their chosen space, right? In the area of building and construction, right? So this is an option for people who haven't quite gotten ready with your business model, right? As I explained in my earlier sessions, the best time to go to angels or angel groups is when you have an idea of what your business model looks like and you're ready to commercialize. So if you're not yet there and you can't get money from friends and family, one of the ways to go about developing your product is to join an accelerator or an incubator. I mean, the words are interchangeable. Some people call themselves accelerators, some people call themselves incubators, but they are pretty much the same. They give you space, they give you some mentoring, and they help you get going, right? And then, of course, I would talk a little bit more about, angels, angel groups, and what you need to have ready when you want to pitch to them. Okay, so that's going to be the main focus of what I'm going to talk about today. Next slide, Priya. So this is usually where you start, right? Some people call it an teaser. Some people call it an executive summary. Namely, this is a document, and the advice is, it shouldn't be more than 3 pages. It should only contain key information. You really have to be concise. And as I go through subsequent slides, you will kind of get a feel of what kind of information, right? And it's always better that in a small document, you include more graphics because a picture tells 1,000 words, and that gives people a quick insight without having to spend a lot of time reading it, right? Because the purpose of a teaser is just to attract attention. Normally, when you do a teaser, people don't disclose the name of the company. But if you're an early stage company, the risk of disclosing name is, of course, not a big deal. But you can choose not to at this point in time, right? You can just describe what the company is about, right? So that's what's called an investment teaser. And to be honest, you would get all kinds of samples about these things. All you need to do is just Google, right? Just go and Google and you will get sample documents of investment teasers. You will get documents on what an information memorandum would look like. You will get slide share documents on what a pitch deck should look like, right? So, there's plenty of resources for you, right? So basically what I want to touch on is just some of the key features of these documents, right? So that we can have a fairly meaningful Q&A at the end of this session, right? So that's the investment teaser. So this is what you send out to potential investors. If you decide that you're ready to face angels, you will send a brief teaser, and hopefully that attracts sufficient attention for you to have a more detailed conversation. Next slide, please. Okay. So some of the key elements that needs to get into it, the investment teaser, the investment highlights, what are you raising, what are you going to use the money for, how much of shares you're prepared to give, or how much the company you're prepared to give, a little bit about the company, its product or service, and something about the financials, right? So this is the information that would typically be included in the investment teaser. And to just give you an example, the next slide, Priya. See, this is financial information of number of products sold versus what's the revenue, EBITDA, and cash flow, right? So, the message is very clear, right? The picture tells you, well, you're not going to do terribly well, which people understand, and then, the business is then going to grow from there on, right? So at least just from a picture, people can see that, okay, if I wait enough, from the first 3 years may be slow, but fourth and fifth year, we will have a pickup of revenue and profitability and cash flow, right? So always with investment teasers as well as information memorandum, use graphics and use color, right? And one of my biggest bugbear with entrepreneurs in India is that they never use comma to split their numbers. Can you just go back a little bit? Just one slide back, Priya. Right? So if you look at the right-hand scale, right, all my numbers, these are to the thousands to start with. On top of which, I have the 3-digit separation, right? Of course, in India, you can have the lakh separation, right? But for heaven's sake, if you present any numbers, please use smaller numbers. So give me the numbers to the nearest lakh or to the nearest crore because it's easier to read, and use commas, right? I have seen so many spreadsheets coming from entrepreneurs who don't even use commas, and with so many digits, how do I know whether you're talking about a lakh or a crore, right? So, so follow a few convention that make it easier for people to read numbers, right? Otherwise, if they can't read, they're going to throw it away, right? Because nobody wants to put in a huge amount of effort, especially many of the investor types who see so many of this each time, right? So spend the time, think through, and decide how you put these presentations together. In fact, many of the presentations that I put together, I actually do it on Page, which is a and Apple software just because the output comes out so much nicer than the Microsoft products, right? But of course, I think, just if you use colors, if you're sensible about breaking the numbers up, then, it's easy enough for people to read. Okay, moving on, Priya. Yeah. So usually what happens is after you have sent an executive summary or an investment teaser, you will normally enter into a non-disclosure agreement, right? At Keiretsu, we don't really sign non-disclosure agreements at that stage, and we just tell the companies, just present, you can have your non-disclosures if you really need to share confidential information, right? So we can say, look, keep things that are secret. But if you're dealing with people that you have completely no clue, right? You have no idea who you're speaking to, it would be wise for you to get a non-disclosure agreement. And what is a non-disclosure agreement? Basically, it's an agreement to keep confidential information private, right? So that if you have some unique business model or a proprietary technology, then you don't want message about that going to everyone, right? And now you have to be sensible about this, because if you think everything about you is confidential, then nobody wants to talk to you, okay? Right? But at a certain stage, and with people that you have completely no idea, they didn't come to you recommended, they have come to you from somebody who knows somebody else, what we call the 3-degree separation, then you need to be a little bit more careful about the information that you share, right? So basically, what do the non-disclosure agreement do? And more than a legal contract, it is a legal agreement, but it puts some moral pressure on people to keep information private, right? So basically, it's a commitment to keep information confidential unless compelled by law, right? So unless the law says, oh, okay, you can't keep this private, and you need to inform regulatory authorities, okay, then there is no choice, right? That's called an exclusion, right? Or rather, there are exclusions, meaning there are information that becomes public later on, right? So then that's okay. That no longer is covered by the agreement. The non-disclosure agreement will normally have a period. Normally, it's not more than 2 years, during which time that the information needs to be kept confidential. I mean, some of that is relevant because, by the time you would have had scale, you would have changed, your technology would have improved, your financial numbers would have changed, right? So normally, there is a period of agreement, and every agreement that you sign usually has an applicable law, okay? There'll be lots of other standard items in an agreement, which I would talk about in the 6th session when I talk about transaction documents. It will be things like applicable law, how do you deal with disputes. So there are a lot of such standard clauses that becomes part of your transaction documents, right? Which is really in the 6th session. But just remember, every agreement must have an applicable law. Okay, the next slide. Once you have an NDA, or at least you feel comfortable about sharing more information with the potential investors, you might send them an information memorandum. Now, I will talk about the information memorandum, and subsequently I will talk about the pitch deck. Some of the information that gets into these documents are similar, okay? It's just that the information memorandum tends to be a Word-like document, often put together with pictures and with graphics and all that kind of stuff, right? And it's a document that one can read. The pitch, so it tends to be a Word document, or in my case, a page document, which is then converted into a PDF. You can even have encryption or whatever so that people don't forward it to anybody else, right? So it tends to be a document in that sense, right? So you have full words, full sentences. So it's a properly written document. That's an information memorandum. The pitch tends to be a set of PowerPoint slides, okay? So the problem with the deck is if somebody doesn't explain what's in the deck, it's very difficult for somebody to understand, right? And nobody wants to read small print, which is what happens if you try and put a lot of information into a PowerPoint slide. So for that reason, the information memorandum is done as a Word document or a page document with sufficient spacing, colors, and all that kind of thing. Now, even an information memorandum, if it's probably less than 20 pages, you may not have an executive summary, right? So you will have an executive summary if the information memorandum is very long, right? So it's a judgment call that you make. If the document is very large, have an executive summary that summarizes the key features that you have set out in the information memorandum. Again, go back, Priya. Okay, again, if you just key in information memorandum or investment memorandum, you will get all kinds of samples on the web, right? There is plenty there for you to see, okay? So, the ideas I have set here are just guidelines, right? You can always change them to suit your particular circumstance, right? But normally a place to start is something about yourself, right? And we normally refer to the investee company or the company that is available for sale or available for investment. We call it the target, right? So an overview of the target, right? This is your company, including your products or services, right? So first, what are you about? Next, you talk a little bit about market and the competitive landscape. When you talk about market, people talk about market size, addressable market, and all that sort of information that one typically would pitch about, right? How big is the market? Which is the market that you can capture, right? And I think some of these terminology we covered in the first session in the seed start checklist that we shared with you, right? So there is a lot of information there that could help you, right? But certainly, we want to know how big the market is, because normally people are attracted to products that can reach large markets, right? Because then, the profit potential is pretty high. And also about competitive landscape. Very often companies come to us and say, well, we are unique, there's no real competition. That's almost never true, right? There is always competition. The question is whether they do exactly what you do or something kind of similar, right? So when you look at the competitive landscape, you need to be much wider in looking at the competitive landscape, right? Because your product may be nothing because people will do nothing, right? If people do nothing, they continue operating or doing things the way they do as is, and then nobody will buy your product, right? So your analysis of competitive landscape needs to be a bit broad, right? And therefore also look at alternatives to your solution, right? So, if you say there is no other competitor, people will not take you as seriously as perhaps they should. Okay, the next slide, Priya. Right, intellectual property is a big thing, especially many of the companies we've looked at tend to be engineering solutions. They tend to be unique, and therefore there is intellectual property involved. Even with software solutions, there's intellectual property involved, right? Because you have source codes, and therefore your investors want to know that you have a strategy on how you keep that confidential, how that information doesn't become openly available, so that your IP is protected and it's only yours, right? And this is a little bit of a tricky situation when you are a really early stage company, because you don't want to spend a lot of money trying to protect register patents across the world, because it's extremely expensive, right? So one of the ways to deal with it is sort of say, this is the plan, right? This is the way we have for now. We are not filing patents, but we are keeping source codes or other information extremely confidential. And as we expand and reach a particular size, we plan to either register a trademark, register a patent, or whatever it might be, right? So something about your IP strategy is also of useful interest to potential investors, right? Certainly something about your business model and the information that goes in there. We talked about quite a bit at last week. So all the information we talked about that goes into a business plan should be part of this section, right? Which is your revenue model, and very important, your GTM, right? Which is go to market, right? Everybody wants to know, okay, you've got a great product, how are you actually going to sell it, right? Because if you can't sell what you have developed, then what's the point, right? Unless you sell, there is no profit coming back, there is no cash coming back, right? And it's a useless investment then, right? So an articulation of this, I have put it all in one section. You may break it up. You may break up and say, A, revenue model, B, go to market, 3, marketing plans, which might include who you're going to hire, what channels you're going to use. So many of these terms, you got introduced to it last week, right? So I won't go into it. And then certainly you need to talk about the financials, right? If you're a early stage company, you will not have much by way of financials, but you must present some form of projections, right? And I gave you an example earlier on where I showed a set of graphs that kind of says how it's going to go about. Next slide, Priya. Okay, then the information memorandum must also discuss how much is the fundraise? How much are you raising? What are you going to use the money for? Right? It may even have what instruments are you going to use? Are you going to have equity? Are you going to have CCPS? Are you going to use convertibles? Are you going to use safe notes? There are all kinds of instruments, right? And some of these instruments we will talk about in session 6 when we talk about transaction documents, right? The terms of it, terms meaning what is the pre-money value? Therefore, they can work out what is the post-money value. And again, what is pre-money, post-money? Some of these terms we'll talk about in the 6th session, right? So your information memorandum, to the extent possible, must have all of these information. And now, if you're a startup and you're looking for angel investors or venture capital, certainly there needs to be a discussion about what is the exit potential of this business. And actually, this is a very, very difficult area. And truth be told, it's very difficult for you very early to determine, how you might achieve an exit, right? But you need to make an attempt. And if you have a lot of difficulty, you do need to talk to people who have some experience, right? And if you're at a really early stage, I mean, you can be a little vague about what the potential is, right? Because basically people want to, when an angel investor or a venture capital investor invests, they kind of want to know how they're going to get the money back, right? Not just how they're going to get the money back, how they're going to get a multiple of the money that they've invested back, right? So they want to get an idea of who might be potential buyers of the business, or, are you going to take it public, which, it's very hard to predict. But you need to put some thought and write up something about it, right? And certainly very important, you may have covered team as part of your business model, but certainly, key members of the team, the founders, advisors, that gives credibility to the venture as a whole, right? And of course, if you send out an IM, you should state very clearly who the recipient should contact, right? And all the phone numbers or the email details you need to present, okay? So this is an IM. So this is a document that you would send out, and, things are written there in full, in full sentences, and therefore we will have a lot of it, right? I would, I'm noting some of the questions that are coming in, but I will touch on them when I have finished, right? I will allow plenty of time for questions and answers. Okay, the next slide, Priya. Okay, now a pitch deck tends to be a PowerPoint, right? So it's a little different from the IM, okay? And therefore, how you present this is kind of different. if you look at my set of slides, you find that I don't crowd the slides with a lot of things, okay? So when you put a pitch deck together, don't write full sentences, don't write full words, right? Because, it is really terrible on the eye and people will not appreciate it, right? So the best way to deal with a pitch deck is, maybe one slide for each key point, and make sure that the slide is not crowded, right? So that it is easy to read. And if it makes sense to put a single graph or a picture on a slide, then do so, right? Because you can speak over the slides and explain that particular slide, right? And this is the reason why sometimes a pitch deck won't tell the story as well as a information memorandum, right? So you would use this, you would either send an information memorandum or you would send a pitch deck depending on who your audience is, okay? Now, if you're making a pitch in person, you should use a PowerPoint slides, and you would send a full information memorandum as a follow-up if they ask for it, right? So that's the difference between the information memorandum and the pitch deck. But often the information that goes into it is fairly similar, okay? But when it comes to a pitch deck, just again, you go and Google, and almost universally, right? Every recommendation, whether it's 500 startups or any other investment organization, and there are many of them out there, they will almost say, you should start your pitch by explaining what is the problem that you're solving. Okay, so there is a problem, right? And you're solving the problem, right? So you have a solution, right? So we talked a little bit about fit last week, right? So there is a problem, you have a solution, so you have a fit on paper, right? You have a problem solution fit, right? Before you get to a product market fit, right? Which is the next thing, right? So you have a solution, and since you have a solution, what is the solution? Effectively, it's a value proposition, right? So it's a value proposition for a specific customer segment, right? And you should now be familiar with all of these words because we went through it last week, right? So effectively, when you talk about having a value proposition and having a customer segment, right, you are able to say, yep, I have a market, right? So that's a statement about market validation. And at very first session, I said one of the reasons for startup success is getting the timing right, right? So when you talk about I have a solution and the market needs it, you also need to be able to demonstrate why the market is ready for that solution. Because if the market is not ready, it's not going to sell, right? So you need some sort of explanation about the market as you talk about the solution. Then, of course, what is the product and what is the market size, right? So that's pretty standard information. Then the business model, right? How do you make money out of it, right? And we talked quite a bit about the business model last week, right? So I'm not going to repeat, right? So things that you really need to get into it, right? What is your value proposition? What is your customer segment? What are the channels that you're going to use to make sure that your value proposition reaches the customer segment, right? What kind of relationships will you build, right? What is your revenue model arising from that, right? All of that needs to be covered, but they need to be covered kind of briefly, and where possible, use charts, diagrams, so that it is visually appealing to the eye. Next slide, Priya. Right. You need to talk about competition, right? What is the competitive advantage, right? So I think I use the word your unique selling proposition. Why should somebody buy your product and not an alternate product or something peripheral that already exists in the market, right? So you need to be able to specify what is your competitive advantage, and for sure, what is your go-to-market plan, right? GTM stands for go-to-market. And one of the big issues with many of the engineering startups that we deal with, I mean, we like these engineering companies, but usually they kind of struggle from the marketing side, right? So many excellent engineering solutions that we have seen have struggled to go to market because they just didn't have the skills to do the right marketing, have the right business development people, know how to knock the doors and win business, right? So that's a very important skill. So often, right at the outset, you need to talk about what is your go-to-market plan. Then, of course, something about the team. Who's the team? Who's the board? If you have strong advisors, then people want to know who are your advisors, and also testimonials, which might include you may have been featured in the press, or some customer some customer may have said something really nice about your product, and you'd like to have all of those things in your pitch deck, right? Because it kind of sells your proposition better than something else. Okay, the next slide. Next slide, Priya. Right? And finally, what goes into the pitch deck is similar to what we talked about in the information memorandum. How much are you raising? What are you going to use it for? Right? If you have it, what is the valuation at which you're going to raise it? It could have some of the terms, what is the instrument? Is it common shares? Are you going to issue CCPS, convertibles, safe notes? So many of these are standard terminology, and we will talk more about what some of these terminology means in session 6, right? When we talk about valuations and transaction documents, right? Because all of these things you have to understand. Okay, so and now in Kiritsu, basically at our forum meetings, the entrepreneurs will have a pitch deck and they present that to the potential investors. And we give them only 10 minutes to present the pitch, and followed by 10 minutes of Q&A, right? So a pitch deck should not be huge, lengthy. It shouldn't be 30 slides. You really need to keep it to 6, 7 slides, 10 slides at the most, right? And talk through them, okay? So, if you start repeating yourself, or you start, saying the same thing in a different way, you find that people lose you, right? And there is a reason we force people into a discipline of making the pitch in 10 minutes is the same concept as an elevator pitch, right? Get the message across quickly, right? And then you can have a detailed conversation with the people who are specifically interested, who liked what they heard. Then you can have a detailed conversation with them that can run into hours sometimes. I mean, you can invite them, show your product, demonstrate your product, and all that kind of stuff, right? But the initial pitch shouldn't be long, because people want to know quickly whether it's something that interests them or not, right? So you have to be very concise, very focused on what is the information that you want to deliver, right? So particularly the 2 documents that I've talked about, the pitch deck, as well as the teaser, needs to be brief, right? And to the point, concise, visual if possible, graphs, diagrams, charts, because that would send the message really quickly and across and to someone who's particularly interested, right? Okay, my last slide, so so that we at least have 45 minutes of Q&A. Now, many of the presentations that we have seen, even if it's a great product, if not presented well, it often falls flat, right? Because people will leave the session feeling, I didn't really understand. And often you don't get a second chance, right? So if you're making a serious pitch, I think it is worth your while to practice making the pitch first, right? So some of the people who pitch to us are very willing, to be mentored by us before they even make the pitch, right? Sometimes we have been blunt enough to say the CEO shouldn't make the pitch, let the CTO make the pitch, because the CEO just unable to speak and explain what it's all about, right? So sometimes getting the right person in the team to make the pitch can make all the difference, okay? So, you should practice, you should speak out, present to a small group of people, and seek feedback, right? Now, the thing about feedback is some feedback is useful, some feedback is completely useless, right? So I'm not telling you to listen to every feedback, but it is important for you to collect all the feedback and evaluate it and decide how you should adjust the pitch. Okay, so a lot here is about knowing your audience. So many, we have pitched, my businesses, the medical simulator business, and each investor has its own, to use the colloquial expression, each of them have their own funda, right? They think of investment potentials based on their background, their vision of reality, which may not be the real vision of reality, right? But the problem is, at the end of the day, when you are pitching, you have to win an investor, right? Maybe it's not that investor, it's some other investor. But if many people are telling you similar things, then you should make the effort to change your pitch, right? Because some people might say, well, if you're an engineering business, a GP margin of 50% is not attractive, right? I want to know where's your recurring income, right? It's a bit like a razor and blade model. Selling razors is not all that exciting. Are you really going to sell a lot of blades, right? Which is the one that gives you more recurring income, right? So things like this are business model questions, but sometimes you need to listen to such feedback and sort of adapt or adjust your deck, right? So, and it's always about knowing your audience, right? So I think I had a slide right at the start. Who are you pitching to? So depending on who you're pitching to, you may have to adjust it, right? You may also decide, right? So some venture capital or some angel investors only invest in certain type of businesses, right? So always know your audience, right? So, if they don't invest in e-commerce and you have an e-commerce idea, then it's a complete waste of time, right? So some amount of research on who you're pitching to really makes a difference. Now, based on the feedback, always update and improve your pitch. And in any case, over time, your business will change, you will get more orders, your financials may change, and your environment might change, right? So your pitch during COVID times may not look the same as your pitch during non-COVID times, for example. So always adjust your pitch to the circumstance and the environment. Okay. Okay, we're getting to Q&A. So let me look at the questions and then let's go through it. First question, could we have a model template? There is so much available on the web. So instead of taking my model, I'm just giving you the features. Just Google investment teaser, just Google information memorandum, just Google pitch deck, and you will get n number of ideas, right? So, as long as they cover the features that I've gone through in the slide deck, you should be fine, right? There is no substitute for hard work. So you can do that. Could we have a model pitch template? Yeah, the problem, I also couldn't show you the template, right? So for example, I showed you one bit about the pitch deck that I put together, or the information memorandum that I put together, right? Many of you all know about my medical simulator business. So I showed you a deck, but I can't share every piece of information there, right? Because a lot of it is confidential. So many of the pitch decks that I have a lot of confidential information, and I can't, willy-nilly share it with public, right? So I was prepared to share that particular one graph because, many of that information has already changed, right, from before, right? So I can't share a pitch deck with you, but to be honest, there is so much resource on the web. You should really have no difficulty getting it, right? Unless, I don't know if TiE has any templates, but
I think, Subra, I think
yeah.
we gave some model pitch decks to TiE during Pitch Fest. The
Yeah,
samples.
but that's exactly what I covered, in the pitch deck slides. What is the problem? How are you
Yeah,
solving the
but there are
problem?
some
Why?
samples also. They could take it, and if TiE has it, they might have it.
Yeah, but there's plenty on the web.
Yeah, plenty on the web, yes, definitely.
Plenty on the web. Now, is a business plan and information memorandum on the same thing? Not really. Okay.
Now you're given one explanation below.
Okay. Not really, but you find that the information that goes into both of them are fairly similar. In the business plan, you would talk about, you would talk about the business model, you would talk about the team, you'll have the financials. So you have a lot of the information in a business plan that also goes into the information memorandum. Now, the information memorandum then has a little bit of additional stuff, right? If I, Priya, can you go back to the slide that says I am continued?
I think the fourth slide or something.
I am continued. It has fundraise, exit potential. So some of these, okay, next slide, Priya. So some of these information is often not found in a business plan, right? Fundraise, exit, what are the terms of the raise? What are instruments? What is pre-money value? What is an exit potential? Who to contact? So there is some information that goes into information memorandum that's on top of a business plan, right? So very briefly, that's the difference, but there is a lot of overlap on the information. Let me go back to the question business. Could we have at least model of executive summary, teaser, NDA? I'm sure a lot of people have NDAs. I don't know, SPK, if you have our standard NDA.
Yeah, we have.
Yeah.
Smart
Right.
capitals. Yeah, we have.
Yeah. So I think NDA we can share. Some of the others are all confidential because it's about specific companies. So, come on, man, it's time you did some work. Go through
Yeah. NDAs are very specific because it contains some aspects of not sharing information specific to the agreement.
So many of the information.
Yeah.
Okay, Jawahar, how do we estimate exit potential? So it depends on the business, right? So if you have a software business, you sort of look at who are the software majors who may buy it, right? So that's how you assess exit potential. You look at the product or service and you make an assessment of who are the other people, right? So we've also invested in a lot of healthcare businesses. And you sort of look at, if it's a pharmaceutical solution, then you know that one of the pharma majors are a potential buyer, right? So it really depends on what your product or sale is, right? And there are situations, especially when you're very early, some of this is just a guess, right? But people want to try and get the feeling that at least there is some way that their investment will translate later into profit and cash, right? Because otherwise, if an investor is invested into the company and you can't achieve a sale, then you're stuck, right? Then it may have to be what's called a dividend play, right? That means, you are profitable and then you distribute the dividend to the investors, right? That's not the typical investment that most investors like. They might live with it if there is no other choice, but ideally people are looking to make investments into companies that would sell at a multiple to somebody else, right? So basically, once you have an idea of where you are placed, then you look at some of the big companies who are in the market and could be potential acquirers of your business, right? So that's usually how it is assessed. And usually you get better at it as your business becomes more mature because it becomes clearer as to, who is the more likely acquirer. How important is the team member, advisor, consultants? I think I talked about, composition of team in one of the earlier sessions. So often we are sort of looking for complementary skills. If it's a tech solution, is there someone with marketing skills? Is there someone with really good, deep tech experience to develop the product? either directly or indirectly, do they have people with the right financial background, to make sensible decisions about cash flow, projecting cash, and all that kind of thing. So it is, so having a complementary team is always helpful. And where you can't have so many team members, then maybe some of these skills can come to you through advisors. You don't need consultants as such. Advisors, consultants has a different meaning for me. I think when you're really large and you're doing a Series A round, and I talked about what is seed round, growth round, pre-Series A, Series A. When you're doing a Series A or Series B, it does make sense for you to engage one of the investment managers, because they will help you put together a really good information memorandum. They will probably be able to better identify potential investors. They may have specific relationships with various institutional investors. So for some of those big raise, it might make sense for you to have an investment manager, if that's what you mean by consultants. Right, and they would help you through the pitch process. Okay, IM, business plan, not the same. Yep, I've talked about it. Jawahar, what is CCPS? CCPS are instruments that I would talk about. CCPS basically stand for compulsorily convertible preference shares, right? The reason it's compulsory convertible is that it doesn't remain as preference shares forever based on the terms of your agreement, your valuations, valuation caps. These are all, subject for Session 6. It would convert to ordinary shares, right? Because most things need to convert to ordinary shares at the end. Right, compulsory convertible preference shares, and there's some of these terminology, right? They would convert to equity. So what are term sheets is also something I would cover in Session 6, because these are all linked to the valuation questions. Is there some way you can share docs for my advice? Yeah, I'm sure you can, right? You have my email. I'm not signing NDAs with anyone, so send it to me only if you trust me. Please explain differences between, okay, what is value proposition? I defined it for you the last time, and I will define it again. Right, we covered this in the session last week. So value proposition describes the benefits customers can expect from your product and service. That's what a value proposition is. Now, what is a unique value proposition? It's the reason why someone should buy your solution, your benefits, and not somebody else's, right? So that's where you have a unique value proposition. The unique selling proposition effectively means the same thing, right? We have tended most of the time to use USP, right? So selling means, okay, somebody, this is the reason your solution, right? Your value proposition sells. Value proposition is something that's pulled by customers, right? So whether it's unique value proposition or unique selling proposition, it means the same thing. Basically, it means why your value proposition is better than somebody else. Positioning statement, to be honest, I haven't used that at all. Features, advantages, benefits, that kind of describes your product or service, right? And when we talked a little bit about the value proposition canvas last week, we talked about it, right? Because we talked about the value proposition canvas as a fit between the value map and the customer profile. right? So when you talk about the value map, you talk about the product or service. And when you talk about a product or service, you talk about its features, advantages, and benefits, right? So the way we talked about the value map is what are your gain creators and what are your pain relievers, right? So to some extent, it is the words that you are talking about, right? Features, advantages, benefits, right? The problem with features is it is not a description of the advantage, right? How does it relieve pain? How does it create gain for your customer, right? So these are all play on words. So I tend to use the words that I have introduced to you all over the sessions because that there is some analytical thinking that's gone to describe that. Moat. Can Arun tell me what moat stands for? Because I don't know what's moat. I'm sure if you tell me the words, I will know what it means. But
yeah, can I talk? This is Arun.
Tell me, what is moat?
Moat is I think it's a unique thing. I think what you are completely different and where your competition is, you will always beat your competition by this moat.
But what does moat actually
Okay, moat, I think in the literal term I'm not sure. I think it's a separation around the fort, right? I think with the water down. So I think which protects that one. I think that's a literal meaning. But in the business sense, I think that's something which you are very good at it, where your competition will not beat you on that. That's a moat.
Okay.
Yeah,
the reason why I put all those 5 words is, I think even I'm confused. I think it's all getting interchanged. I think it's all used in one place or the other. I think that's the reason I want to get the difference between value proposition, USP, I think, and the position statement, all those things. Because people are, it's getting confused. Even I'm not very, at times I get confused. That's the reason I brought that question.
Okay, so let's drop it because I have no idea.
I have also not heard about moat. Actually.
Yeah, I haven't heard it. Okay, so we'll skip that. See, there are many terminologies, many abbreviations, right? So if you can't tell me what each of the letter in the abbreviation stands for, it's very difficult to explain. There's so many models out there. Some of them are performance improvement models. So different venture capital firms use different abbreviations. Usually they refer to things like markets, things like that, right? The information that we have talked about over the last 3 sessions already, what's the value proposition, customer segment, channels, and all that kind of stuff. Do we need to have multiple versions of the pitch deck? It actually makes sense to have several versions of the pitch deck because you want to tailor something to your particular audience, right? So for example, if you're going to an angel group, normally, the amount you're likely to raise is unlikely to exceed 1.5 or 2 crores. I think the largest we have ever done is 4 crores, and that's because many family offices co-invested with us. So the pitch to an angel group may look a little different from a pitch to a venture capital, except that if you lie, you will get caught. So people would see through your pitch, but I mean, you can always tweak something to the audience, right? Because different audiences are looking for different things.
Ashwara, hi, this is Raj. I was just trying to speak and there was something wrong with my system. I was just trying to respond to that earlier question on moat. I think it pretty much sort of follows whatever I've heard of this and the usage of the word. It largely is in the zone of the dictionary definition that someone talked about. It's a protective thing that covers the castle. So by design, a moat is something which ensures that it makes it tougher for more people to enter that market. So it's like sets a very high entry bar for others who want to enter. So your USP in a way could become a moat because you're a first mover and you've done things which others can't. very easily get into. So that's really a moat which helps you support your business. So just to respond, the USP could be a moat because not everyone else can copy that, and therefore it keeps you separate and safe and ensures that you retain your share. Just thought I'd respond to that.
Right. Okay, I'm just Googling, and I think there's something associated with Warren Buffett. As Buffett explains, with this being the case, finding companies with an impregnable moat is essential. Okay, so defensible, right? So something that we would talk about is the defensibility of your business model. So to try and help build some ideas of what an impregnable moat looks like, I've gathered quotes from Buffett and give you some ideas of the kind of business he's looking for. Okay, right. So it's the same thing. So it's just defensibility, I think, is what it means. Just that it was in all capitals, so I didn't understand, right? So anyone wants to know more about it, just Google Warren Buffett moat and you will get some answers. Jawahar, will come to you. Let me just see what other things. How do we find valuation of company before fundraising process? Tough. We tend to understand value because we have invested for 6 years. So we have an idea of what is reasonable value. And if you come to us with a valuation that's absurd, we will tell you straight to your face, it's absurd. Because we have a sense of how valuation grows. There are various providers that give us some valuation information. Many of them are not great because basically they scroll the web and try and pick up whatever information that they can get from the web. There is one service provider that I am looking at in Singapore who does a much better job than anybody else because he gets information directly from the registrar of companies. But right now his information is limited to what he can pick up from the registrar of companies in Singapore. And he has a system by which he gets that information, and then he manipulates it and puts it in a way that gives you how valuation has grown at different rounds of investment. But the short answer is valuation information is extremely difficult to get. Okay, and I would talk a bit more about how difficult valuation is in my session 6. But so many of us build it up, have learned it over time. We have some rule of thumbs that we apply, and we would speak a lot more about it in session 6, right? So you got to wait for session 6 on valuations. Okay. Okay, Jawahar wants to ask some questions. Can you unmute him?
Yeah. Good evening. How are you?
Yeah. Good.
Okay. Sir, a couple of questions, sir. One is, you talked about the founding team, right? I don't have a person, say, for example, right, in my business that is related to agribusiness. I need a horticulturalist, who can give me inputs on plant growth, and the health of the plants and things like that. But he's not my partner, but I can hire him as an employee. So when I come and pitch to you, or send you the first teaser, if I say that horticulturalist is just one of my employees, I'm just trying to keep my partnership team as small as possible, but I want to hire a few more key people in my team as employees. Will that be looked upon by investors as a negative thing? How do you
No, see, look, at the end of the day, each person's circumstances is different, right? So what is an investor looking for? Okay, you have a horticulturist as an employee, right?
Yeah.
And if it's really so critical to your business, the question that the investor will ask is, will this person stay with you throughout, or is this person going to be there until he finds the next job, right? Okay. So that's really the question, right? So how do you keep someone critical to your business, right, as a startup? Normally, you incentivize them with some equity, right? If they stay with you for X number of years, you will share some amount of the founder's equity with them, right? Which sort of incentivize it, right? So if there is a key member, right? So if it's a technology business, the CTO may be key, right? And therefore people would say, if your solution is so dependent on the technology, then will the CTO stay through with you for a reasonable period of time, so that you can actually do what you need to do, right? So that's really the question you need to answer, right? The question is, okay, is the horticulturalist essential? Or, even if the person resigns, you can find somebody else. Or can you get good advice from someone who is an advisor and a well-wisher to you, right? So, there are no hard and fast thing, because nobody can, nobody makes decision based on yes, no, Yeah. Nobody makes yes, no decisions, right? So they see it in context.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And the other question I had, sir, was, say I'm getting money from investors, and I grow my company, and then at some point my company is really doing well, and so I'm in a position to to pay back my investors. So is it possible to give the money back to my investors at some point, and is there a way to part with them at a later point of time? Should it be put it on the agreement? Should you put it on the agreement, and how does it work?
Well, you can have a buyback clause in your agreement, right? Okay. Now I will talk about all the confusions. Do you have a put, or do they have a call?
Okay.
Okay. So put and calls mean, put means if there is a put and there is no call. If there is a put, means that they can put the shares to you at whatever price that's agreed in per the transaction agreement. You don't have a right to call. If you have the right to call and they don't have a right to put, then they would say, well, why should I sign a one-sided agreement, right? So these are all negotiations that goes into transaction documents, and it can become extremely complex. But again, when you say buyback at what price? People need to see a return.
Okay.
Right? So can you think about all of this at the early stage of fundraise? I am not sure. If you think you can, that's fine, right? Remember, if they have a put to you, right, then at a price, and if you don't have the money at that time, then you have a problem.
Oh, so how does this investment thing work now? I mean, when you invest, so the relationship between the investor and the actual team goes on forever, or at some point it
so that's why there's need an exit, right? So in 5 years, there are no exits. Usually the investors will start talking to the founding team and say, okay, let's work towards an exit, right? Who are potential buyers, right? Can we start building some relationships? I mean, that's what it happens. If you already have an institutional investor by then, a venture capital, I mean, the moment a venture capital invests in you, they're thinking about exits. So they would be developing relationships right from that time, looking at who potential buyers might be, right? So VCs are even tougher than angels when it comes to exits, because that's how they make business. They have a 10-year fund life, right? So they have to return the money to the LPs, who are the limited partners, the investors in the fund. So exit is what drives venture capital.
Oh, sir, but what if I'm not interested to sell my company, right? Because
they wouldn't even invest in you at the outset,
Oh,
right.
But 5 years from now, I mean, see, it's my project is like a baby, right? So, I have put in so much of effort and time, and I have dreamt about it, and I'm building brick by brick. And then 5 years from now, if investors force me to sell, the dream project I am in, then
see, this is a typical Indian problem. Okay, we are too sentimental. Okay. Right. So the way the investment industry works is, You know, they would tell you, right? You're an entrepreneur, right? Basically, what is your skills? Your skills is in bringing something new to the world, okay? Now, if you have built it to a certain stage, you probably don't have the skills to make it really big. It's a different set of skills. It's no longer entrepreneurial skills. It's managerial skills to build it into a huge enterprise, right? Aren't you better off selling it and starting your next business? Because the skill sets are extremely different, right? Very few of us straddle both sides of it, right? I'm one of the few who have had managerial skills working in big firms and also have entrepreneurial skills and sort of struggled through it the last 10 years. Very few people are like that. So they're very different skill sets, right? So when you are a big company, you start thinking about what is the governance model? How does the board operate, right? When you're an entrepreneur, you make decisions very quickly with your small team. That's not the way big companies work, right? So, I mean, this is a choice you need to make, right? So obviously, you know, not saying that you can't have a business and then run it on your own. In that case, you probably want investors who are happy to be with you, you know, and maybe happy with you, you know, paying dividends now and then, and maybe you go and buy back their shares at something that they feel is attractive enough, right? But that's very, I mean, that's not the thrust of the investment industry.
Okay, gotcha.
Right? So if you want to do something like that, you have to be very clear up front, you know.
Okay, sir, gotcha. Thanks a lot, sir.
Any other questions? We still have time. We still have another 15 minutes or so. Yeah, there are a few more valuation considerations. I would talk about valuations in session 6 because valuing startups is not so straightforward. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands up. Please, if you all want templates, just go and Google. There's so much available. You know, I did just that before just to find out what's there. Any more questions? There's no more on the chat box. Ah, there's one. Jawhar, yeah, go ahead. Jawahar, you said one more question. What's your question?
Then yeah, just unmuted it, sir. Sir, I missed that part, you know, when you talked about the accelerator come incubator. So I'm still not clear, you know, what would be, how the accelerator would be different from an angel investor or a venture capitalist. Can you please explain it to me again, sir?
Okay, fine, right. An accelerator incubator. So let me take an example, right? IIT Madras has got various incubators. There are also several accelerators in Tamil Nadu, and usually they have a specific focus, right? So many of the institutions in Coimbatore, PSG has an accelerator or an incubator, whatever they call. So many of the universities do have accelerators, right? So now in an accelerator, very often they don't give you money. Some accelerators do. There are accelerators in Singapore that might give the investors maybe $30,000 or $50,000, right? To help you kickstart a business, right? Convert an idea into a proof of concept, right? Yeah. So they come in kind of early. They help you prototype your product or solution. They give you space where you can do your research, develop your product, prototype your product. And usually they also have a whole host of advisors. I think many former students from IIT actually became mentors as part of the incubator. So if you want to speak to a particular person with a specific skill set, the accelerator will enable you to do that. So on top of providing space and maybe a little bit of money, They help you take your solution or your idea from the product stage to the proof of concept stage, right? And I've talked about what proof of concept is in my earlier sessions. And typically you don't pay anything, but you may give up, some 5 or 6% of your shares to the incubator. So that's what they take. They don't take a huge equity. So they're not. So they're a different kind of investor, if you like, right? They may put money, but not much. But they provide a lot of guidance. They provide facilities, maybe the infrastructure for you to test your product. That's what an incubator or accelerator is. And many of them would be very specific, right? So you may have a healthcare accelerator, you may have a biotech accelerator, you may have a software or SaaS accelerator. So they tend to be very specific, right? So they're only interested in company. Or in IIT, there's also the rural development accelerator, right? So they tend to be very specific, and they accept applications at certain times from companies.
Okay, so if it's accelerator, then the money comes from the PSG management, or how does it work, sir?
Sorry, say again.
So the money for the accelerator, right? So say, for example, if it is a PSG, if the incubator is inside PSG Tech, then the money for the accelerator comes from the management, PSG Tech management.
Yeah, I think they have various institutional funds. Right?
Yeah,
so
they have sponsors also. People who look at
sponsors.
companies.
I think in the case of IIT, I think some of the alumni also have made money available for early stage companies. So that they have monies from various sources.
Okay, got you.
Yeah.
Sir. Thanks a lot, sir.
Okay, Ishrat, you've asked a question: how to go about what? Do you want to ask the question? If you're unmuted.
Yeah. Hi.
Yeah.
So basically, I probably am that kind of entrepreneur, which you said that we start businesses, but we don't know to. Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah. Loud and clear.
Yeah. So then I don't know how to, set up big management systems and, continue it from there. But the business has already started up, and we were making some money, but I need to sell them off. So for that, can I contact these people, or there's a different set of people? Like, would the VCs be interested in, say, giving a little funding to sort of pep it up a little bit more? And would they help me to sell this business, like exit in, say, 6 months to 1 year? Because we've got everything there. We just need to now just push it a bit and then sell it off. Would they be interested?
Okay. VCs will invest in you if they see a potential for a huge exit, right? Because for them, okay, if I invest today, within 3 to 5 years, can I get 5x or 10x exit, right? That's how VCs think about it.
Yeah.
Now, if all you need is to exit and you're looking for an exit in 6 months to a year, then the people that you need to be talking to are the investment bankers or the M&A consultants.
Oh, okay.
And again, there are many of them in Chennai as well, right?
How do I reach them?
I mean, ask TiE. I'm sure they know who all the investment bankers are, because some of them are charter members of TiE.
Okay.
Or you just Google, investment bankers in Chennai, right? And you will get an idea.
Right.
And the idea is go talk to them, talk to all of them, see if you have a chemistry, do they really understand your business, right? They would also want to know something about your business.
Yes.
Because, is it of a size, will there be any interest for that particular business? They normally can tell, right? If all of that work, there are also a dime a dozen individuals who would do it for a fee, right? Or do it for a fee. So it's very, so they are there. If you're sizable enough, then one of the more established investment bankers will pick it up.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Any other questions? Go to chat. I think with most things in life, if you just send a pitch, if it doesn't raise an interest, then nobody will reply to your mail. So sometimes it's always worth, talking to someone and getting an introduction, right? Then you get a little bit more attention. I mean, I get many pitches that come to me, and some of it is completely not in my area of interest, and therefore it is a straight delete, right? All of us have to manage, all of us just need to manage the amount of information that we get, right? So, it's always important how you write to someone. If it's very impersonal and somebody doesn't have time, it gets deleted. Ishrat, my area of interest is really deep tech. Deep technology is my area of interest. But it depends, right? It doesn't mean that we don't invest in other areas, but each of us build our own buyers over time, right? Not that I don't have investments in non-deep tech areas, I do, but we each of us develop a buyers over time. Any other questions? We're 8 minutes from the end. Have I invested in food processing? I don't think so. I have done due diligence in food processing companies, but those are large companies, and that's work that I did when I was at PwC. I haven't invested in food processing. I have invested in agri businesses, and Jawahar, as I told you the last time, I didn't have a good experience with those. ERP, software services, again, not my area. I'm not saying others are not interested. My only thing about services business, and I've certainly said it in the earlier sessions, it's very difficult to scale services businesses, right? So unless the software has a product that's compelling, right, and can scale, angel investors or investors per se are normally not interested in software services. Many people have done it. Someone asking about educational platforms, the problem is a very competitive space. SVK is telling me SaaS is very competitive, lots of players. Yeah, I mean, Tamil Nadu is a center for SaaS, right? So there are a lot of things. Jawahar, I can't answer the question, what is the downside of investing in food processing? At the end of the day, it depends on how you have positioned it, right? Many people do food processing, but if you have a compelling proposition, maybe you're close to the source of agriculture, right? Maybe your cost is compelling. So the idea is to build a value proposition that is so compelling, then people would invest in it. So at the end of the day, it's not so much the business, but what is the business model that you have created that makes the value proposition so compelling that people want to invest in you? Yeah. Any other questions? Right. I usually try and allow more than enough time for questions each of my sessions. My only fear is session 6, actually. There's a lot to go through, but I think we'll still try and have enough questions.
Yeah, maybe they should prepare themselves for questions because they know what the subject is anyway for the next session.
The next one is due diligence. Due diligence, I think, is a little straightforward. But I think the last one on valuations and transaction documents can be very complex. But anyway, we will cross the bridge when we come to the river. Okay, and no other questions? Priya?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I
Thank
think we are
you.
almost time. So if there are no other questions, we could close, I think.
Yeah, sure. I think we just got one.
Yeah, investment teaser executive summary. Please Google. I can't give you the ones I have because they're confidential. I'll tell you what the rough content is, but if you just Google, you will. There's so much out there, so much.
Yeah. So thank you, sir. Thank you for your session, and thank you for covering various aspects on executive summary, the NDA, information memorandum, and what are the things that needs to be covered in a pitch deck, and also emphasizing on how much you should practice and get feedback, and how much it is necessary to improve yourselves. And thank you very much for that, sir. And thank you for a long Q&A session. I'm sure the participants are more interested in asking you a lot of questions post each session, and I know for sure that you are aware of that from the previous sessions as well. So thank you so much, sir. Thank you, S3K sir, for the support you have given Subra sir, as well as the participants in the chat as well. So we'll be having our next session and the next and the fifth session on the next Wednesday, 2nd September, where the topic, as mentioned by him, is going to be on the various aspects of due diligence. And before we sign out, there's a small announcement from TiE Chennai.
Priya, just one thing. I think someone was asking whether they get the slides, which I
Yeah,
needed
I
to.
will. I'll be sharing it post today.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, I'll be sharing it with them.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Yeah, go ahead.
So before we sign out, I would just like to inform that our annual conference, TiECon Chennai, is planned this year in the month of October from 5th to 10th, which is for 6 days. And we'll be having our speaker sessions in Tamil from 5 to 6 p.m. and speaker sessions in English from 6 to 8 p.m. And we are also having our first ever virtual TiE Sunday, which is going to be open for visitors from morning 10 a.m. to evening 8:30 p.m. The slots for booking a stall at TiE Sunday is open, and feel free to reach out to Saurav at saurav@tiechennai.org to book your slot. And until we meet next time, next Wednesday for the fifth session, thank you, and see you all.
Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you.
Good night.
Thanks, SVK. See you.
Yeah, see you. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.